Before reason, there was myth. Gods ruled the seas, the sky, and the fate of men. But in one small city on the coast of Ionia, a man asked a dangerous question. What if nature could explain itself? Chapter 1. The first drop. Thales and the birth of rational thought. The world is water. The Greek philosopher Thales of Miletus stood by the shores of Ionia and observed the world not through myth or prophecy, but through a new lens, reason. He looked at the rivers, the rains, the sea, and dared to ask a question no one before him in the Greek world had asked in quite the same way. What is the world made of? And more importantly, can we understand it, ourselves? His answer was simple, even poetic. Everything is made of water. At first glance, it may seem naive, almost childlike, but behind those words lay a transformation that would alter the course of Western thought forever. Though not the first thinker in history, Thales is often called the father of Western philosophy because he broke with myth and looked for natural causes. Unlike the myth-makers of Homeric Greece, who explained the universe through the will of gods and the whims of monsters, Thales sought the principles of nature, not through worship, but through observation and reason. He was not rejecting the gods, nor rebelling against religion. Rather, he was taking the first bold step toward a different kind of truth, a truth that could be known, tested, and understood by human thought alone. This shift, from mythos to logos, marked the dawn of philosophy in the Western tradition, and it began, fittingly, with water, the most common, the most essential, and the most mysterious substance in the ancient world. In a culture shaped by oral epics and divine ancestry, Thales proposed that the world followed natural laws. He claimed that beneath the surface of the visible world, there lay order, a structure waiting to be uncovered, and he believed that the human mind was capable of finding it. His student Anaximander would later argue that the true source of all things was not water, but something more abstract, the apeiron, the boundless. His successor Anaximenes believed it was air. These debates, though primitive by today's standards, were revolutionary. They were not just arguing over elements, they were arguing over how we can know anything at all. They were building the foundation for physics, metaphysics, cosmology, and for asking why the world is the way it is. So why does it matter that Thales said everything is water? Because in doing so, he was thinking in a new way. He introduced a framework that would echo through the halls of the Academy and the Lyceum, shape the dialogues of Plato, inform the logic of Aristotle, and reach all the way into modern science and philosophy. Thales did not invent thinking, but he changed what thinking could be. He was the first drop in an ocean of ideas still rippling outward today. Chapter 2. From Mythos to Logos. The Ionian Enlightenment. Before science, before theory, before philosophy had a name, there were myths. Stories of gods, giants, and monsters explained why the sun rose, why storms raged, and why people suffered. These tales were not seen as fiction, they were truths, passed down through generations, woven into the identity of the people. Mythos, the narrative explanation of the world, was the natural way to understand existence. But in a small cluster of Greek city-states along the coast of Ionia, something began to change. It didn't start with war. It didn't start with conquest. It started with a question. What if the world isn't ruled by divine forces but by natural ones? A new kind of thought. In the 6th century BCE, the thinkers of Ionia began to ask not who caused thunder, but what causes it. Not which god pulled the sun across the sky, but how does it move? These questions marked the beginning of a new kind of thought, rational, structured, critical. Where mythos explained the world through stories, logos sought to explain it through principles. The thinkers who emerged from this period are now called the pre-Socratics. They weren't a formal school or movement, but they shared a common belief. That nature could be understood through observation and reason, not through divine revelation. They were the first to look at the world and say, "Let us observe, let us think, let us explain." Anaximander and the boundless. Thales may have sparked the flame, but it was Anaximander, his student, who fanned it. He proposed that the world did not rest on anything at all, no turtle, no columns, no divine support. Instead, the earth floated freely in space, held in place by balance and symmetry. This was more than speculation, it was the seed of cosmology. Anaximander went further. He argued that the source of all things was not water, but the apeiron, the boundless, and infinite, eternal substance beyond our perception. It had no shape, no limit, but from it emerged all opposites, hot and cold, dry and wet, life and death. This was not mythology, it was abstraction. A bold attempt to explain all of existence in rational terms. Anaximenes in the breath of the cosmos. Another Ionian, Anaximenes, brought the discussion back to something more tangible: air. He believed that air, through processes of condensation and rarefaction, transformed into all other substances: water, earth, fire. In his view, change was not magic, it was mechanical. A system, a law, a rhythm of nature. He spoke of the soul as a breath that holds us together, just as air holds the cosmos together. Even in the 6th century BCE, philosophers were already making connections between microcosm and macrocosm. From stories to systems. What made these thinkers revolutionary was not just their content, it was their method. They didn't appeal to gods or mythic ancestry. They made claims, offered arguments, and expected reasoned disagreement. For the first time in Greek history, truth became something to be examined, not just received. Ideas were no longer sacred, they were testable. The world was no longer mysterious, it was knowable. This shift from mythos to logos didn't erase religion or myth from Greek life, but it carved out a space where the mind could operate independently, where thought became a force of its own. It was a quiet revolution, but its echoes would never fade. Why Ionia? Why did this shift happen in Ionia and not somewhere else? Several factors converged. Geography: Ionia sat at the crossroads between East and West, where ideas from Babylon, Egypt, and Phoenicia flowed freely. Trade and wealth: prosperous cities gave birth to leisure, writing, and discussion. Politics: these were not monarchies, but city-states, where debate, not decree, shaped life. Cultural openness: the Ionians were willing to look beyond tradition and absorb foreign knowledge. Out of this fertile ground, the roots of philosophy grew. A legacy begins. The Ionian philosophers weren't always right. Their theories were crude, incomplete, sometimes bizarre by modern standards. But they asked the right questions, and they trusted the mind to find answers. In doing so, they laid the foundation for all that followed. Science, logic, metaphysics, cosmology, ethics. They built a new relationship between the individual and the world, not ruled by fear, but by understanding. They were the first to say the universe is not a riddle, it is a reason. Chapter 3. Pythagoras and the Harmony of the Cosmos. To most people, numbers are tools. To Pythagoras, they were sacred. He saw mathematics not as a human invention, but as a language written into the very fabric of the universe, a divine code that revealed the hidden structure behind all things. Where Thales asked what the world is made of, and Anaximander sought where it comes from, Pythagoras asked a different question entirely. What if the world is not just material, but musical? A philosopher in a new key. Born on the island of Samos around 570 BCE, Pythagoras would eventually settle in Croton, a Greek colony in southern Italy. There, he founded a community, part school, part cult, part monastery, dedicated to the study of number, harmony, and the soul. This was no ordinary school. Members followed strict rules. They ate no meat, they practiced silence. And they treated numbers with reverence, as if each equation whispered a truth about the cosmos. Pythagoras believed that everything could be explained by proportion. The length of a string, the spacing of stars, the motion of planets, all followed mathematical harmony. Even the human soul, he believed, was governed by the same order. To him, mathematics was not abstract, it was the structure of reality. Number as principle, music as proof. According to legend, Pythagoras once passed a blacksmith's shop and noticed that the sound of the hammers striking the anvil varied in pitch. Curious, he investigated, and discovered that the weight and length of the hammers correlated to musical intervals. From this came the idea that music is mathematics made audible. This was more than novelty, it was philosophy. It suggested that beauty, truth, and order were not just human values, but cosmic laws. That harmony was not subjective, it was measurable. The Pythagoreans even spoke of the music of the spheres, a concept that planets and stars moved according to mathematical ratios, producing a kind of silent symphony in the heavens. We could not hear it, they said, because we had always been surrounded by it, like fish in water. The triangle and the soul. Pythagoras is best known today for the Pythagorean theorem, a geometric relationship between the sides of a right-angled triangle. But in his world, this was not a dry formula, it was a key. A key to truth, to divine order, and even to rebirth. The Pythagoreans believed in the transmigration of souls, that after death, the soul would return in a different form. To live well, one had to pursue purity of mind and body, balance, and reason. Numbers were not just symbols, they were a pathway to the eternal. To them, philosophy wasn't about argument, it was about discipline, devotion, and discovery. A new shape of philosophy. Pythagoras introduced something radically new into Greek thought, the idea that truth can be abstract, not tied to the senses, but to invisible laws. Where Thales and the Ionians tried to understand the world through physical elements, Pythagoras shifted the focus to something deeper: form, pattern, structure. He showed that we can know the universe not by seeing or touching it, but by thinking. In this, he helped open the door to Plato, who would one day argue that the visible world is only a shadow of eternal forms. A legacy rooted in silence. The Pythagoreans were secretive. Much of what we know about them comes through later writers, and much remains uncertain, but their impact was profound. They brought mathematics into philosophy. They connected the mind with the cosmos. They believed that the pursuit of knowledge was not just intellectual, but spiritual. Their world was one of order, beauty, and balance, a universe singing a silent song, waiting to be understood. Chapter 4. Heraclitus, Parmenides, and the problem of change. Fire or stone? Flux or stillness? Becoming, or being? In the century following Thales and Pythagoras, Greek philosophy faced its first great internal conflict, not about what the world was made of, but about whether the world could even change at all. Two thinkers, Heraclitus of Ephesus and Parmenides of Elea, stood on opposite shores of this debate. One saw the world as a river, in constant motion, the other, as a perfect sphere, unchanging and eternal. And between them, philosophy would be forced to ask its most difficult question yet. Can anything truly change? And if it does, how can we know it? Heraclitus, the philosopher of fire. Heraclitus lived in Ephesus, a vibrant Ionian city, around 500 BCE. Known for his cryptic sayings and aloof character, he wrote in aphorisms, short, poetic fragments filled with tension and paradox. His most famous declaration is simple, yet profound. You cannot step into the same river twice. Because the water is always flowing. Because the self is always changing. Because the world is in constant motion. To Heraclitus, the essence of reality was change itself. Nothing is fixed, nothing is stable. All things are in a process of becoming, and at the heart of that process, he believed, was fire, the symbol of transformation, of destruction and creation in one. Conflict and logos. But Heraclitus did not see this constant change as chaos, quite the opposite. He believed that conflict was necessary for harmony, that strife was the engine of order. Just as a lyre's string must be pulled taut to make music, so too must the world contain opposites in tension. He called the governing force behind this balance the logos, a universal principle of reason, law, and proportion. It was the order behind disorder, the logic within contradiction. The path up and the path down are one and the same. War is the father of all things. Heraclitus saw a world in motion, but not meaningless. Change was not random, it was law-bound, knowable, even divine. Parmenides, the philosopher of being. And yet, hundreds of miles away, in the Greek colony of Elea, another voice rose in direct opposition. Parmenides declared that all of it, motion, change, birth, death, transformation, was an illusion. He wrote in verse, like the poets, but his message was radically unlike theirs. What is. What is not. That was the foundation of his thought. Being is. Non-being cannot be. And if what is truly exists, then it cannot come from what is not. So things cannot begin, they cannot end, they cannot change. Because to change means to become something that was not before, and that, to Parmenides, is impossible. A world without change. According to Parmenides, reality is one, unchanging, eternal, and indivisible. The senses deceive us. We see movement, difference, multiplicity, but the mind, through reason, reveals a still and perfect unity. He imagined being like a solid sphere, without parts, without gaps, without variation, all motion, all diversity, all time itself. He called these illusions of human perception. It was a cold, elegant vision, and it terrified many of his contemporaries. Because if he was right, then nothing we see can be trusted. And everything we think we know about change, life, progress, is false. Philosophy torn in two. Heraclitus and Parmenides laid down a problem that philosophy has never stopped trying to solve. Heraclitus: the world is fire, ever changing, ever becoming. Parmenides: the world is being, unchanging, unmoving, eternal. And yet, both claimed to follow reason. Both believed in a deeper order. Both distrusted appearances. One placed faith in motion, the other in stillness. One in the senses, the other in logic. Together, they forced Greek philosophy to confront a contradiction at the heart of existence. And it would be up to a new generation, Empedocles, Anaxagoras, and ultimately Plato, to try to reconcile the two. Echoes across time. Today, their voices still echo. Every time we ask whether the universe is static or expanding. Every time we question whether identity persists through change. Every time we wonder whether reality is what we see, or something hidden beneath the surface. We are walking the same path they once did. The path between fire and stone. Between becoming and being. Between what seems, and what is. Chapter 5. The Golden Age. Athens and the Public Philosopher. Philosophy began on the edges of the Greek world, in Ionia, in southern Italy, in coastal cities touched by foreign winds. But in the 5th century BCE, something extraordinary happened. Philosophy moved to the center. To a city unlike any other: Athens. In Athens, philosophy stepped into the daylight. Out of mystery, out of abstraction, and into the public square, the agora. Here, it would no longer be a private practice, it would become a way of life. A civic duty, a challenge, a provocation. And for the first time, it would be embodied by a person, one who did not write, did not lecture, but who lived philosophy, face to face, question by question. His name was Socrates. And his city was the cradle of what we now call the Golden Age of Athens. The city of thought. 5th century Athens was not just a city, it was an experiment. Here, democracy had taken root, not perfectly, not universally, but radically. Ordinary male citizens could speak in the assembly, vote on laws, and serve on juries. Rhetoric, persuasion, and public debate became essential tools of power. Wealth flowed into the city through trade and empire. Art and architecture flourished. Tragedy and comedy were born on its stages. Names like Pericles, Sophocles, Phidias, and Herodotus filled the air. And among them walked the philosophers, some admired, others feared. Sophists in the marketplace of ideas. Before Socrates, a group known as the Sophists rose to prominence. They were traveling teachers and rhetoricians who offered something new: education for a price. They taught young men how to speak persuasively, how to win debates, how to succeed in politics. To the Sophists, truth was not absolute, it was relative, a matter of perspective. What mattered was what worked. Their teachings matched the spirit of Athenian democracy: fast-paced, competitive, pragmatic. And yet, some found their ideas dangerous. Among them was Socrates, who saw in rhetoric without ethics the seeds of corruption. Socrates, the gadfly of Athens. Socrates did not teach in the traditional sense. He wandered the streets, barefoot and curious, stopping strangers, questioning generals, artisans, poets, and politicians. What is justice? What is courage? What is the good life? He claimed to know nothing, but in questioning others, he revealed how little they knew. His method, elenchus, the Socratic dialogue, was less about teaching than exposing contradiction. He believed that truth existed, but that it had to be earned, not memorized, not bought, but uncovered through relentless inquiry. To Socrates, philosophy was not a subject, it was a moral mission. A tool for purifying the soul. A path to virtue. And, ultimately, a form of citizenship. Balance scale philosophy on trial. But not everyone admired him. To many Athenians, Socrates was disruptive, subversive, even dangerous. He questioned too much. He made the powerful look foolish, and he refused to flatter the democracy he lived under. In 399 BCE, at the age of 70, he was put on trial. The charges were vague impiety, and corrupting the youth. He defended himself calmly, with reason and conviction. He could have fled, he could have begged for mercy. Instead, he drank the hemlock and died, surrounded by friends, with a final argument on his lips. In death, he became immortal. Socrates left no writings, but his student Plato would make sure the world never forgot him. The birth of the public philosopher. Socrates changed what it meant to be a philosopher. No longer was the philosopher a distant mystic or cosmic theorist. He was now a citizen, a presence in the city, a mirror to society, a challenger of norms. Philosophy became a form of activism, a search for ethical clarity, not just metaphysical speculation. It entered the courtroom, the assembly, the dinner table. In the generation after Socrates, Athens would produce some of the greatest minds in human history: Plato, Aristotle, Demosthenes, Xenophon, each shaped by the idea that thinking is a public act. A city, a life, a legacy. The golden age of Athens lasted only a few decades. War, plague, and internal conflict would soon bring the experiment to its knees. But its ideas, of dialogue, of freedom, of critical thought, would survive. Because in the life of one man, in the memory of one city, philosophy had stepped into the open. It had looked the world in the eye and asked, how should we live? And it is still asking. Chapter 6. Plato, Shadows in the City of Ideas. When Socrates died, philosophy could have died with him. No writings, no school, only memories, arguments, and questions left in the minds of those who had stood in the agora and listened. But among those minds was a student unlike any other, a young man named Plato. Where Socrates lived and died in conversation, Plato picked up the pieces and gave philosophy a structure, a voice, and a home that would last for millennia. Through him, the questions of Socrates became doctrines. The doubts became systems. The life of one man became the foundation of a philosophical empire. From student to master. Plato was born around 428 BCE into a wealthy and politically connected Athenian family. He may have become a poet or a statesman, had he not met Socrates. That meeting changed everything. After Socrates' execution, Plato left Athens. He traveled through the Greek world, gathering ideas, encountering other philosophies, Pythagorean mathematics, Egyptian mystery traditions, and Italian science. Years later, he returned, not to seek power, but to build a school, the academy. Here, for the first time, philosophy had a home. It was no longer just a conversation in the marketplace, it became a discipline. And in Plato's hands, it became visionary. The allegory of the cave. One of Plato's most enduring ideas begins in darkness. Imagine, he says, prisoners chained inside a cave, facing a blank wall. Behind them burns a fire. Between the fire and the prisoners, others walk, casting shadows on the wall. The prisoners see only the shadows, they believe them to be reality. Now imagine one prisoner is freed. He turns, sees the fire. He climbs out of the cave into the world above, into sunlight, into truth. At first, he is blinded, but slowly, he sees reality, not shadows, but real things. And then, he goes back, to tell the others. They do not believe him. This is Plato's world, a world where most people live in illusion, and only through philosophy can they find the truth. The world of forms. Behind the cave lies Plato's most profound doctrine, the theory of forms. According to Plato, the physical world is not truly real. It is changeable, imperfect, and constantly in flux, just as Heraclitus described. But beyond this world is another realm, the realm of unchanging, perfect forms, or ideas. Every circle in the world is flawed, but the form of a circle is perfect. Every act of justice is partial, but the form of justice itself is eternal. Every tree, horse, or human is temporary, but their ideal forms are unchanging. To know something is to recall its form. To learn is not to absorb new things, but to remember the eternal truths the soul knew before birth. In Plato's world, the real is not what we touch, but what we think. The philosopher king. But Plato was not only a metaphysician, he was also deeply political. In his work The Republic, he asked, what is justice? What is the ideal state? His answer was bold: society should be ruled not by wealth, not by birthright, but by philosophers. Why? Because only philosophers pursue truth over opinion. Only philosophers seek the good itself. Only they can rise above illusion and guide others to the light. His ideal state was a meritocracy, where people were divided by aptitude. Producers, farmers, merchants, workers, guardians, soldiers, defenders, rulers, philosopher kings. It was not democracy, it was not tyranny. It was a city ruled by wisdom, the city of ideas. The dialogues. Plato did not preach, he wrote dialogues, dramatic, literary conversations, often featuring Socrates as the central voice. These works, the Apology, Phaedo, Symposium, Republic, and others, are among the most influential writings in history. They explore the nature of the soul, the meaning of love, the path to knowledge, the architecture of the state, the pursuit of the good. In them, philosophy becomes not just a system, but a living encounter. A struggle, a search, a journey toward truth. From the cave to the light. Plato gave philosophy permanence. He turned questions into doctrine, experience into theory, and dialogue into literature. He believed that truth existed, and that the soul could find it if it turned away from the shadows and toward the light. For Plato, philosophy was a kind of ascension. From ignorance to wisdom. From illusion to reality. From opinion to knowledge. From the cave to the sun. Chapter 7. Aristotle, the Organon and the Roots of Science. Where Plato saw the world as shadow and illusion, Aristotle saw substance. Where Plato looked upward to eternal forms, Aristotle looked around, and down, to the ground beneath his feet. Plato was the visionary. Aristotle was the analyst. Plato built worlds of perfection. Aristotle catalogued the real. Together, they formed the twin pillars of Western thought. But where Plato inspired mystics, idealists, and utopians, Aristotle laid the groundwork for logic, science, biology, ethics, and politics, all through the simple conviction that the world is knowable, and that careful observation leads to truth. If Plato built the dream of philosophy, Aristotle built its structure. The student of Plato. Aristotle was born in Stagira, in northern Greece, in 384 BCE. At the age of 17, he traveled to Athens and entered Plato's academy, where he studied for 20 years. But even as a student, he was different. While Plato spoke in metaphors and myths, Aristotle asked for definitions. While Plato divided the world between appearance and reality, Aristotle saw layers of reality, each accessible to the careful mind. He admired his teacher, but he would later write, Plato is dear to me, but dearer still is the truth. Logic in the method of thought. Aristotle's greatest contribution may be the least dramatic, but the most enduring logic. He was the first to systematically study how arguments work. He defined rules for deduction, what makes a conclusion valid, what makes it fail. He created tools like the syllogism. All humans are mortal. Socrates is a human. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Simple, perhaps, but these structures became the foundation of Western reasoning for over 2,000 years. They formed part of a collection of texts known as the Organon, Greek for instrument, Aristotle's toolset for thought. To Aristotle, clear thinking was not a luxury. It was the first step toward knowledge, and knowledge was the first step toward virtue. The birth of natural science. Aristotle was not content with theory. He observed, collected, and classified. He studied animals, plants, weather, and the human body. He dissected marine creatures. He wrote treatises on biology, zoology, physics, and geology. He didn't just ask, what is the world made of? He asked, how does a bird know to migrate? Why do things fall downward? What is the purpose of a heart? His method was revolutionary. Observe. Describe. Classify. Seek causes. Infer principles. He called it the search for causes, and identified four. Material cause what something is made of. Formal cause its shape or essence. Efficient cause what brings it into being. Final cause its purpose. This last cause, the telos, was central to Aristotle's thought. To understand something fully, he believed, was to understand what it is for. Ethics in the good life. Like Socrates and Plato, Aristotle believed philosophy must lead to a better life, but his approach was more grounded. In his Nicomachean Ethics, he asked, what is the good life for a human being? His answer: a life of virtue, lived in balance. He spoke of the golden mean, the idea that virtue lies between extremes. Courage lies between recklessness and cowardice. Generosity lies between wastefulness and stinginess. Honesty lies between brutal truth and deceit. A good life is one where reason guides action, where habit shapes character, and where the soul fulfills its function as a rational being. For Aristotle, happiness, eudaimonia, was not pleasure. It was flourishing. Living in accordance with one's nature. Politics and community. Ethics, for Aristotle, could not be separated from politics. Humans, he wrote, are political animals, born not to isolation, but to community. In politics, he argued that the city-state, polis, exists to allow citizens to live well, not just to survive, but to thrive morally and intellectually. He explored different forms of government, monarchy, aristocracy, polity, and their corrupt versions, tyranny, oligarchy, democracy. His ideal state was a balanced system, where the middle class held power, avoiding the extremes of wealth and poverty. He believed laws should be based on reason, not whim. And rulers should rule not for themselves, but for the common good. The Lyceum and the Legacy. After Plato's death, Aristotle left Athens. He later returned to found his own school, the Lyceum. Unlike the Academy, the Lyceum focused on empirical study, observation, and categorization. Aristotle and his students collected texts, classified plants and animals, and conducted early research. He taught Alexander the Great, who would carry Greek ideas across Asia and into Egypt. Though Aristotle died in 322 BCE, his writings, meticulous, methodical, encyclopedic, would shape the medieval world, the Renaissance, and the birth of modern science. Where Plato gave us the dream, Aristotle gave us the map. The mind that measured the world. Aristotle was not always right. He believed the heart, not the brain, controlled thought. He thought heavier objects fell faster than lighter ones. He underestimated change and experimentation. But he gave the world a method, a belief that the universe could be examined, named, measured, and ultimately understood. He asked that we look closely, think clearly, and search for causes. He reminded us that philosophy is not just a matter of abstraction, but of observation, of practice, of life. In the long arc of knowledge, Aristotle built the first tools. Tools still in our hands today. Chapter 8. Philosophy and the Common Citizen. Democracy, Debate, and Education. Philosophy began as the pursuit of truth. But in Athens, it also became something more. A tool of citizenship. A way of life for the many, not just the few. No longer limited to mystics or aristocrats, philosophical thinking entered the streets, the courts, the assemblies. It was debated in theaters, in symposia, and on the steps of temples. And at its center stood the Athenian citizen, called not only to act, but to reason. For the first time in history, philosophy met democracy. And that meeting would change the meaning of both. Democracy as a school of thinking. Athens in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE was a radical experiment. A direct democracy in which male citizens could speak, vote, and rule, not through representatives, but through participation. Every citizen could be called to serve on a jury, propose laws, or defend their ideas in front of hundreds. In this climate, the ability to think clearly, speak persuasively, and challenge authority became essential. Philosophy was no longer abstract, it was practical. A matter of survival, justice, and leadership. The Athenian model demanded not just citizens, but critical thinkers. The art of argument. In this environment, debate became a form of power. This is where the sophists found their place. They taught rhetoric, logic, and persuasion, not to seek eternal truth, but to win arguments. To them, reality was flexible, and truth a matter of context. Critics, like Socrates and Plato, accused them of relativism, of teaching people how to appear wise rather than be wise. But the sophists democratized philosophy. They brought language, reasoning, and self-reflection to the masses. They were, in many ways, the first public intellectuals. In Athens, the battlefield of ideas was just as important as the battlefield of war. Education as virtue. Philosophers began to recognize that education was not merely about knowledge, but about character. Plato argued that a just society must begin with early moral education, not wealth or punishment. He envisioned a state where philosopher kings would rule, not because of birth, but because of rigorous, lifelong training in mathematics, ethics, music, and dialectic. Aristotle went further. In his Politics, he wrote, "The citizen should be molded to suit the form of government under which he lives. For a democracy to function, it must teach its people how to think, how to question, how to discern right from wrong." This was philosophy as civic responsibility. Reason in the hands of the people. What made the Athenian moment unique was not just its philosophers, it was its audience. Ordinary citizens were expected to follow complex arguments, listen to opposing views, and make decisions that affected the fate of the city. There were no filters, no technocrats, no hidden elites. This demanded a culture of dialogue, doubt, open inquiry. It was a society that, at its best, assumed every person could think. The legacy of this idea would echo across centuries, from Roman law to the Enlightenment, from Renaissance humanism to modern liberal democracy. The belief that reason belongs to all can be traced back to the agoras and academies of Athens. Theater, tragedy, and public philosophy. Even theater became a vehicle for philosophy. In tragedies by Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus, citizens witnessed complex moral dilemmas, conflicts of duty, and the limits of human knowledge. The stage became a mirror to society's soul, a place where questions were asked that no law or leader could answer. What is justice when it conflicts with family? Can one person defy the will of the state? Does knowledge lead to wisdom or ruin? These were not just artistic questions. They were political, philosophical, personal. The limits of the experiment. But Athens was not perfect. Citizenship excluded women, slaves, and foreigners. Philosophers like Diogenes the Cynic mocked the city's vanity. Socrates himself was executed by the very democracy he had challenged. And yet, within this flawed system, philosophy flourished like nowhere else before. Because for a brief moment in history, the human mind was free to speak, to question, to imagine a better world. It was a city where the street could become a school, where the citizen could become a thinker, and where philosophy belonged to the people. Chapter 9. Legacy. From Agora to Academy. How the Greeks transformed the West. Ideas are fragile. They live only in minds, voices, and words. They vanish with time unless someone preserves them. The ancient Greeks did more than ask questions. They built structures, intellectual, institutional, and cultural, to protect, teach, and transmit the spirit of philosophy. From the open-air debates of the agora to the formal teachings of the academy, they laid the intellectual foundations of the West. What they left behind was not a set of answers. It was a method, a tradition, a way of seeing the world, and of thinking through it. From conversation to institution. Socrates spoke in the marketplace. Plato opened a school in a grove outside Athens. Aristotle taught while walking beneath shaded colonnades in the Lyceum. Each generation moved philosophy further, from voice to text, from person to system. By the 4th century BCE, philosophy had become more than a conversation, it was a curriculum. One could now study logic, ethics, rhetoric, astronomy, biology, metaphysics, and political science, all within a structured philosophical life. These early schools, the Academy, the Lyceum, later the Stoics, Epicureans, and Skeptics, would carry forward the questions first whispered on the Ionian coast. The Greeks made thinking itself an enduring institution. The Age of Hellenism. After the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE, Greek culture spread across Egypt, Persia, and into India. Cities like Alexandria, Pergamon, and Rhodes became new centers of learning. In Alexandria, the library, perhaps the greatest the world had ever seen, housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls. It aimed to collect all human knowledge. Greek thought blended with Egyptian science, Persian astronomy, and Indian metaphysics. New philosophies flourished. Stoicism taught reason and self-control in the face of fate. Epicureanism sought happiness through moderation and inner peace. Skepticism questioned whether truth could be known at all. Even as Athens declined politically, its intellectual spirit lived on, adapted, translated, and absorbed across the ancient world. Philosophy meets empire. In the Roman world, Greek philosophy was both respected and reinterpreted. Statesmen like Cicero, emperors like Marcus Aurelius, and generals like Julius Caesar were steeped in Greek ideas. Roman schools adopted the Socratic method, the Platonic ideal, the Aristotelian logic. But the Greeks had planted something deeper. A belief that to govern wisely, one must first understand the human soul. That politics without ethics is empty, and ethics without thought is blind. The Romans built roads and cities. The Greeks gave them questions to ask. From scroll to scripture. As Christianity emerged in the late Roman world, it collided, and then intertwined, with Greek philosophy. Thinkers like Augustine, Origen, and later Thomas Aquinas read Plato and Aristotle alongside the Bible. They used Greek logic to defend Christian theology, shaping centuries of religious thought. In monasteries, ancient texts were copied, preserved, and passed on. In Islamic civilization, scholars in Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo translated Aristotle into Arabic, refining his logic and adding new insights. Thinkers like Avicenna and Averroes helped reintroduce Greek ideas to medieval Europe, sparking the Renaissance. Greek thought did not disappear. It migrated, merged, and returned, again and again. The modern mind. When European thinkers rediscovered Greek texts during the Renaissance, they found not just old ideas, but a new way to think. The scientific method took root in Aristotle's logic and love of observation. The concept of individual reason emerged from Socratic doubt. The ideals of democracy, ethics, and civic responsibility echoed from the Athenian assembly. In the Enlightenment, philosophers like Descartes, Kant, and Locke stood on Greek foundations, even when they rebelled against them. To this day, when we question authority, debate ethics, or seek meaning through logic, we speak a language the Greeks helped shape. From then to now, you can trace a line from the agora to the university. From Plato's academy to the modern classroom. From Aristotle's syllogism to the code that powers artificial intelligence. What began with a question by the sea, "What is the world made of?" became a tradition of relentless inquiry. Not a perfect tradition, not without its flaws. But one that teaches us that thinking is not a luxury, it is a duty. And that the life of the mind is not something ancient or lost, but something still unfolding, here, now, in us. Chapter 10. Final Reflections. Why Greek philosophy still matters. Why does it matter what a man said 2,500 years ago by the shores of Ionia? Why revisit arguments from a time without electricity, microscopes, or human rights? Why read Plato, when we have politics? Why listen to Aristotle, when we have science? Because at the heart of Greek philosophy lies a question we're still asking. What does it mean to be human? And no civilization asks that question more persistently, more creatively, or more courageously than the Greeks. The invention of thought itself. Greek philosophy was not the first human thought, but it was perhaps the first to systematize thought. It told us that truth is not always in stories, but can be sought through reason. Knowledge is not owned, but earned, through argument and doubt. The mind is not a servant to myth, but a tool of discovery. A life unexamined is not worth living. We don't remember Thales for saying everything is water. We remember him for believing that humans can understand the universe without invoking the divine. That leap, from faith to inquiry, from ritual to reason, is the birth of philosophy as we know it. Reason is freedom. The Greeks taught us that thinking is a form of freedom. When Socrates questioned power. When Plato wrote of ideal justice. When Aristotle said that the highest life is one of contemplation. They were planting the seeds of intellectual autonomy. In every age where truth has been silenced, those seeds return. In every struggle for liberty, philosophy reemerges. To ask why, to doubt, to seek, that is a revolutionary act. Greek philosophy matters because it insists that no answer is final. That dialogue must continue. That truth is a process, not a possession. Not just knowledge, wisdom. In our world of data, speed, and noise, Greek philosophy offers something rare: reflection. It asks, not just what we can do, but whether we should. Not just how the world works, but what it means to live well. Not just how to win a debate, but how to shape a soul. It reminds us that knowledge without virtue is hollow. That logic without ethics is dangerous. That brilliance without wisdom can destroy what it builds. A global inheritance. Greek philosophy belongs not to Greece, but to humanity. It has been preserved by Arab scholars, Christian monks, Jewish philosophers, and Buddhist thinkers. It has been translated, challenged, expanded, and reimagined. It doesn't offer dogma, it offers a path. A way of seeing the world, slowly, critically, and with care. You don't have to agree with Plato to be changed by him. You don't have to follow Aristotle to inherit his method. You only need to start with a question and follow where it leads. The circle continues. We began this journey with a man who said that everything is water. But what he really meant was, everything flows. Everything changes. Even how we think. From myth to logos. From gods to causes. From fate to freedom. Greek philosophy did not give us all the answers. It gave us something better. The courage to ask.